Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cave to the Cross Apologetics. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Tony.
And we're once again in Chapter 6, learning about theories, talking about how science is really hard, and it's really hard to get through this chapter. But we're covering it in Ch.6, How to Be an Atheist, where we're trying to be good skeptics at the very least. We're sober skeptics, and we're trying to understand what exactly is the nature of science, what exactly a theory is, what the influences are. And so we're currently looking at kind of how our worldview affects not only the things that we postulate in our theory, but also what we observe. Yeah. And it's kind of a radical notion of what we think science is or does, but we have to remember that scientists are people, and people come at things with favorites and values and worldviews and assumptions.
And anything to do with people is pretty much messy,
yeah.
Right?
Which I almost think that there's a book which postulates a deity that says that humanity is in a fallen state and needs to get right ordered in order to have a proper understanding of his world. But I can't come up with the name of that right off. So we'll stick with this book, and we're smack dab in the midst of the chapter Real Science is Hard, which is Chapter 6. And so we're going to be finishing that up today, and we'll be moving on to the results of science after that.
Yeah, good. So we ended up last time talking briefly about how our theory-laden our observations are. What we observed is influenced by what we observed what we observe is influenced by the way we believe the world is, and the way our theories are, right? Theories influence observation, which influences theories, which influence observation, and so we have this kind of a circular type of thing, right?
Where the earth is at the center that I am at, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the next thing he wants us to understand is how hard it is to kill a theory.
No. I've seen this. Like, the scientist sees things, postulates something, it doesn't match his theory, and then he says, right, goodbye, theory. I'm going to find a better theory.
No, that's not the way it works. Deciding which observations count or against the theory isn't all that straightforward, and he tells us, right?
I've been lied to my entire life.
So theories are extremely difficult to kill is part of what he wants us to understand here, right? He says, suppose you're experimentally testing a theory, general relativity, say, the theory has told you that you should expect to find that light bends as it travels through empty space. Now suppose you perform an experiment and lo, light does bend. So this counts, if anything does, as support for general relativity. But under determination, as we saw last time, implies that this result is also consistent with a number of possible theories about what may be happening, a number of possible explanations about what may be happening, right?
So the theory accounts for this, but it also does not account for other theories being wrong.
Right.
So the great theory that you could have is saying general relativity explains this, and there's no other means by which an explanation could result in an explanation of this bending of space.
Be nice if that was the case, but it doesn't. It doesn't work that way. Science is harder than that.
Science is hard.
So surely the fulfillment of such scientific prophecies count, he tells us, as some kind of support. After all, if you didn't observe what general relativity predicted, then you'd know immediately that the theory wasn't true, right?
Well, not necessarily. I really like this theory. In fact, I've got millions of government dollars invested in this theory being correct. I need to make this atom bomb, or we're going to start speaking German, and Einstein can already speak it. So I really hope that this is true.
So he says, even on that score, things aren't so simple. He says, to be sure, it seems reasonable to think that it's easier to kill a theory than support it. Our failed prediction should do the job. You discover that light doesn't bend. Well, then general relativity is obviously wrong. After all, this is one way in which theories, in fact, die. They fail to match observations. But, he says, recall the process by which we discovered the planet Neptune. Remember that process, right? Notice, This, as it turns out, is just how Neptune was actually discovered. The Newtonian theory predicted that Uranus should have an observation that it clearly didn't have. Uranus was not doing what the theory said it was supposed to be doing, right? It was acting up. It was failing our predictions based on the theory. So why then, here's the question, right? Why didn't those astronomers that observed that this planet wasn't doing what the theory was supposed to be doing, why didn't they conclude that the Newtonian physics is just wrong, and we throw Newton out?
Or the fact that we can know things and have dependability and have reliability, that things are the same today as they were yesterday.
Yeah. So there are all kinds of issues. So why didn't they just throw the theory out? Clearly, we have now a counterexample of what the theory is supposed to do. We have a failed prediction. We have an object that is acting with accord to what the theory tells us it should do. So we should get rid of the theory. It makes sense, right? The theory must be wrong.
Right.
Notice that is not what they did. They did not throw out the theory. They did not say Newton is wrong. They did not say let's start all over, right? Scientists, he says, don't immediately give up a theory the moment trouble arises. There are usually heroic attempts to save the theory. And this is a good thing, he says, right? If scientists threw away a theory the instant that it didn't agree with observations, no theory would get off the ground.
Yeah. So let's take this out of the sky and put it on the ground. You have a guy that you're looking at for the murder. He's looking good. He's got motive. He's got means. But the opportunity, he's got a waitress that says he was at the club at the time that the murder took place. Well, scratch him off the list. There's no reason to investigate further. The theory is dead, like your victim, and you have to find another suspect.
Yeah.
Oh, except you bring the waitress in, and she was actually paid off by the husband.
Or either she's his girlfriend.
Or, there's many theories that would cause you not to invalidate it and to continue on. You're going to look for maybe other means of explanation that will help reinforce your theory by saying, oh, well, here's an experiment that we did incorrectly or had wrong assumptions going into it, so that we were looking for X, but we got Y, but we shouldn't have expected either of them.
Or our calculations were wrong, right? In fact, when there's a mismatch, Mitch tells us, between theory and observation, it's usually the scientists himself that's blamed, not the theory, right? You did something wrong. You need to recalculate, right? And look at that again, right? And that sort of thing. So it's extremely difficult to kill off a theory, especially when it's kind of solid in the scientific community.
And people seem to name things after themselves, and so it's really hard to kill yourself.
That's right. So that's an issue. So that's another thing that makes science hard, right? You get entrenched in a theory, and now there's something wrong. Now what do? Do you kill off the theory, or do you fight for the theory and see if you can come up with something else? And sometimes there are other things going on, as we saw with these various additions of planetary bodies based on a failed observation or prediction about an observation. The next thing that makes science hard, he tells us, is that theories are never tested by themselves.
Yeah.
Right? He says, this is because we never test a theory by itself. Every experiment is really a test of an entire web of beliefs, a web including far more than just the theory. The sentence, if theory T is true, then we will get observation O, contains a multitude of hidden complications, right? The antecedent to the conditional, so the if-then statement is a conditional statement. The antecedent to it, which is the if portion, the first portion, right? So the antecedent of the conditional statement, the if-then statement, is really a conjunction or a collection of assumptions, right? So if T and so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, then we'll get observation O, right? So that's what he means by a collection of assumptions. So it's not merely if theory T is true, we're really assuming something more like if T is true and we perform the experiment correctly and so on and so forth. So this additional belief or condition is called auxiliary hypotheses. Yeah. So these are auxiliary hypotheses that we need to take into consideration when we're considering if theory T is true, then we'll make this observation. But we're not just saying if theory T is true. We're making all kinds of auxiliary hypotheses that are attached to the if portion of that conditional statement, right? That we need to take into consideration.
So there's nuance in our theory, and so when we allow people to make sweeping generalizations about a theory that we like, we always say, oh no, well there's more to it than that.
Right.
And so by people trying to generalize too broadly, let's take our theory for example. God exists. Well, if God exists, then evil can't exist. Well, you're talking too broadly. Let's assume that God is able to use evil for His purposes. So that doesn't the presence of evil doesn't negate God, and so my theory of God existing can still stand even in the presence of evil.
Yeah, good. So he gives us an example of auxiliary hypotheses, and then he takes another step and he talks about background beliefs that are part of theories as well. So the example of auxiliary hypotheses, he says, if the sample in the beaker is ethanol, then the sample will boil at 78.5 degrees Celsius. So this is actually something closer to if the sample in the beaker, and here's the example he's given us. If the sample in the beaker is ethanol, and that the thermometer is working properly, and my glassware is clean, and the sample is not contaminated, and the air conditioning in the lab is normal, and so on, then the sample will boil at 78.5 degrees Celsius, right? So all those ands are considered auxiliary hypotheses that have to be taken into account, or at least we just assume are there with regard to this particular theory. So these are often hidden because we don't pay attention to these. We don't think about these, right?
Yeah, we don't disprove Newtonian mechanics incorrect by saying some scientists launched a probe at Mars and missed it by a factor of 170 million. We also say, what they should do is also use the same metrics. Yeah. So Celsius and Fahrenheit are two different things. Meters, kilometers, and miles, I would say, are miles in difference. So there's the assumption that if those things were to be held as constant, so utilizing one form of metrics, you would be able to hit Mars using just the way that we've been doing it since the old days.
So that's one kind of auxiliary hypothesis. Another kind, we might call these background beliefs. He says there are more auxiliary hypotheses hidden in and so on. For one thing, obviously enough, for instance, the laws of logic must hold, right? And other things must be true. There must be a world that behaves consistently. Mathematics must be reliable to allow at truths about the world. Supernatural beings can't be intervening in the world willy-nilly. The future must resemble the past. Scientific laws must hold at all times and everywhere throughout the universe. We're not, having hallucinations or under the influence of psychotropic drugs, and so on and so on. These beliefs are a piece and confirm or disconfirm together. So these we might call background beliefs about the way the world is. So the one, we had auxiliary hypotheses about what was going on with regard to experiment. Now he gives us a bunch of background beliefs about the way the world is. And again, we have to take into these things, are part of what's going on. So we say, if theory T is true, and this whole list of auxiliary hypotheses, and this whole list of background beliefs, right? Then, we'll get observation O.
That's a long ways to get there.
Right. So then we never test theories in isolation. Right. When we test theories, we're really testing them with all the relevant background beliefs, auxiliary hypotheses, and all those things simultaneously, right? Or to put the point in a different way, our theory is more than the scientific theory, right? No one, he says, Einstein wrote, no one of the assumptions can be isolated for separate testing. So this all-inclusive view of testing is called confirmational holism, right? And it's and to complicate matters, he says, when we get to a theory observation mismatch, we often don't know which of the auxiliary hypotheses or the background beliefs even, right, is the bad apple, or whether the entire batch is spoiled.
Right. So it could be the theory, but you don't really want to give up the theory. It's a really good theory. You named it after yourself, but you reran the experiment 16 times, and it all came out to the same. But maybe there's some background information. Maybe God did take that probe and just move it over a little bit. Maybe if I allow God in and he works a miracle in this one, then I won't get fired from my job. I can say, God did it, and they're like, well, all right.
That would be a God of the gaps argument, right?
Well, yeah, that one would be.
Yeah.
But I'm desperate. I really want to work for NASA.
So we have to we don't give up on theories because we have all of these auxiliary hypotheses and background beliefs that we can pick on if indeed the theory doesn't meet what our predictions say it should meet, right? And so that's what happened with regard to Uranus and Neptune, right? The theory did not do the predictions did not do what the theory told us they should do. Well, we didn't throw out the theory, right? We began to look at auxiliary hypotheses and background beliefs, right? That sort of thing, to see if we could save the theory in light of the observations that seemed to falsify the theory that we found, right? And so, theories are never tested by themselves, right? They're tested in conjunction with all of these other things, right? And then he says that in theory, any theory can be saved.
We can always save a theory from counter evidence. Why? Because there's so many different, permutations on the equipment being off or your background assumptions. You can tweak any of those or question any of those in order to save it. Well, I'm not wrong that I can get the probe to Mars. I must have set the temperature gauge wrong. No, I checked that. Let's keep going through. Oh, I must have converted meters to miles incorrectly. And so he says we can modify nearly any other belief, assuming we're willing to go far enough.
Right.
No statement is immune to revision, probably even that statement as well. Revision, even of logical laws, which we see as even a possibility within quantum mechanics. And so
laws of logic?
I mean, I really want to save quantum mechanics. I want the 222 dimensions, and I will do anything, almost anything, to say it, including
tinker with the laws of logic.
Sometimes blue is red, so we can even alter the laws of logic to make a theory fit observation, which quantum mechanics may allow us to do. And so we close up by saying, how do we view skepticism in this scientific matter? We say nothing in this chapter that we covered is an argument that science is an extremely impressive human achievement, which is clearly the case because we're talking to you from a camera and microphones that are able to capture our voice and sound reasonably similar to what we're doing, so that's pretty impressive. Nor does it say anything else that compels us to think that science doesn't get at the truth behind the scenes of appearances. Rather, this chapter is an opening salvo against uber optimism that often accompanies contemporary atheism. Like, science explains it. That's it. That's all we do. The theory of evolution is true. There's nothing else. We did the testing. It's fine. We looked. no God here, as Yuri Gagarin said when he was the first man in space. I saw no God. So
as he breathed air,
and was able to come back down, and was able to make statements.
That's right.
He's saying that there's lots of room for skepticism. My goal is to encourage a calm, level-headed appreciation of science, and this chapter gives us insights into the workings, that it's not this photoshopped white lab coats, squeaky clean everything, but that sometimes
it's hard.
Sometimes science has its jets and sharks. Sometimes it's got the people that really want to hold on to geocentrism versus those darn Copernicans. So he finishes up. It says, to be sure, reason and observation are key players, but to think that science is more objective than it is would be to court trouble. And certainly it isn't in accord with the robust and proper skepticism stance which we want. Uber optimism takes neither skepticism nor science seriously, but sober skepticism appreciates both.
All right, so he makes this distinction then between sober skepticism, which he wants us to be sober skeptics, right? That's the goal here. And he says uber optimism about science isn't the way that we want to do, right? Oh, science said it. Okay, that's it. We'll just go forward.
Right.
No. Right? We need to be sober skeptics. But notice he says the other ditch that he wants us to avoid is uber skepticism. Right? We shouldn't be overly skeptical as well. Right? That there's there's the road between these two ditches of uber optimism and uber skepticism about science that he wants us to walk on.
Right. And let's apply this to our own worldview as Christians. We have to have this understanding that for the majority, scientists tends to assume naturalism, which means that there's only the natural world. So even your own mind that you think is a personality that you may ascribe the soul to, those are just chemicals firing. Your love for your wife is just the ability to associate a familiar feeling with higher levels of all the fun stuff that being around your sweetheart gets you. But we exist in a worldview as Christians that says God upholds the universe. He is the one that creates meaning. The laws of logic exist because that's how God thinks. Morality exists because it's out of God's character that he declares these things, and we're able to know them because he communicates those things. Sometimes when we interact with science and scientists, they don't have that worldview, which we would consider a basic worldview. And so how you look at the universe as ordered and structured and able to know things and want to present truthful claims and the ability to continue on and find these new discoveries. I mean, there is a reason why big scientific achievements, and I think this is probably more personal than anything, is discovered by Christians in a Western world. And I think it's one of those reasons that we have a proper understanding of how the universe exists. Not to say that atheists or people without that worldview can't create discoveries or anything like that, but Christianity has a long track record of discovering things, even things that seem to be co-opted by atheists or evolutionary worldview. Survival of the fittest, Christian. MRI, Christian. I mean, all these things. Calculus. You can make a claim for who exactly discovered calculus, but Newton was, he would claim, a Christian. So
Leibniz was too, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of people back then that had that similar claim. And so when we approach any claim made by anybody, we need to understand that the worldview is the first sense in which we come upon it and we look at observations that we make, and we have certain underlying assumptions, and people with widely different worldviews come to different conclusions, or shouldn't operate in with the findings that they come about. So how does a naturalist explain the ability to know today the sun will rise and tomorrow the sun will rise, and each day we'll
without a non-circular argument.
Yeah, right? with a justification for it.
Yeah,
and
a good justification.
Yeah,
right?
and so when we approach these things and we're just leveled, well, science said it, or that's not being very logical. We have to realize that worldview matters, and so presuppositionalism that we ascribe to takes into account those factors, and it's one of the reasons why I think we appreciate that, because it's kind of one of the first things that you go through when you approach brute facts or whatever, if even those things exist. And so it's very important to recognize that worldviews do matter, and we should always be looking at ours and others as well. Good.
Yeah, well said. All right. So real science is hard.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff that goes into it, right? And so as a result of that, we don't Photoshop it, and we don't fall into the uber optimism about, science tells us exactly what the truth, and so be it, and whatever science says, that's what truth is, and that's the only way to get at truth. And no, that's not necessarily the case. We need to be sober skeptics about science because of how difficult. One of the reasons anyway is because of how difficult it is, right?
Oh, but it's difficult, but science will win in the end. And how can you possibly argue with the positive benefits of science? So yes, okay, it may be hard, it may not be as straightforward, but you can't argue with results.
Right.
So
and I think that's what Mitch Stokes wants us to take a look at next time.
Pretty much.
Yeah. How do you argue with success?
Yeah.
Right. That's the next chapter, chapter 7, that's coming up. And so we will see you next time, and we'll dive into chapter 7 and take a look at what it has to tell us.
And remember to share, like, subscribe, comment, do all the things to get the show out there to more people. And we interact with people through the website, caveofthecross.com. And even I try to answer those terrible YouTube comments that you're never supposed to interact with. So see me out there, and also Facebook, Twitter, all those things. All the links can be found at caveofthecross.com. Thank you, and have a great day.
Yep. See you next time.